The sun didn't shine the day Clara James was forced to marry Silas Boone. It lurked behind a wall of gray clouds, as if even the sky refused to bear witness to the ceremony. Dust swept across the dried earth like restless spirits, scraping against the church's old windows and rattling the weather-warped door. The bells didn't ring. There was no music, no laughter. Only the clink of spurs, the dry cough of the preacher, and the rustling silence of a girl trying not to cry. Clara stood in a dress that didn't fit, sleeves too long, hem dragging through dust. Pale blue, her mother's old wedding gown, pulled from a cedar chest the night before and pressed without care. Her hands clutched the fabric so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She didn't tremble. That would have been a sound. Clara had learned long ago how to go still, how to vanish inside her silence. Her father, George James, stood beside her. Former rancher, current debtor. His skin bore the flush of shame beneath a dusting of whiskey. His grip on her arm was not cruel, but it was firm, like holding down a calf before the branding. He didn't look at her, just stared ahead, jaw locked, waiting for it to be over. Silas Boone swaggered down the aisle, as though he owned the ground it was built on. Tall, sun-baked, with a grin that never reached his eyes. His black coat flapped in the wind, dust clinging to the edges like ash. A 6-shooter rested on each hip, though nobody had asked him to leave them outside. No one dared. A pair of his boys stood near the door, armed and lazy, their expressions bored. Like this was just another poker hand in a long afternoon. Silas tipped his hat toward the preacher, then looked Clara over like a man inspecting livestock. "Ain't she something?" he said loud enough for all 20 witnesses to hear. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the benches. Clara didn't blink. The preacher swallowed and opened his Bible, voice dry as parchment. The words stumbled out, something about holy union, obedience, protection. No one listened. Everyone was watching Clara, wondering if she'd scream or run or faint. She did none of those things. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, there was silence. And in that silence, Clara realized no one ever would. "Do you, Silas Boone, take Clara James?" "I do," he interrupted, his grin widening. "And do you, Clara, take?" "I do," her father answered for her, voice tight. His hand squeezed her arm in warning. Clara didn't speak, not even when Silas leaned in and kissed her cheek, rough and fast, like he was claiming land. Not even when he pulled her away from the altar before the preacher could finish. Not even when he shouted to the gathered folks, "Guess she's mine now," and they laughed not because it was funny, but because they were scared not to. She didn't say a word as he helped her onto his horse like she was luggage. She didn't scream as they rode away from the chapel, the sound of hooves covering the stifled gasps behind them. She just looked over her shoulder one last time. Her mother had covered her mouth, crying. Her father lit a cigar. They reached Silas's camp by twilight. A lean-to shack half buried in sagebrush, surrounded by old barrels, broken furniture, and whiskey bottles. A crow cawed from the fence post. Inside, a stained mattress and a crate for a table. Silas grunted and dropped his saddlebag. "Ain't fancy, but it's home," he said, unbuckling his gun belt and tossing it onto the floor. "Get inside and fix us something. I got a thirst." Clara stepped into the cabin, the smell of sweat and rot curling in her nose. She didn't know how to cook. Her hands trembled now, just slightly, as she found a pot and went to fetch water from a rusted barrel outside. The sky was almost black. No stars. No moon. Only the sound of boots thudding behind her. She turned too late. He struck her. Not hard. Not even enough to knock her down. But it was deliberate. Casual. Like swatting a fly. "Next time," he said, "move quicker." She said nothing. She couldn't find her breath. Later, as he slept in the corner, half drunk and snoring like a hog, Clara sat by the doorway. The cabin splintered with biting into her back. Her lip bled. Her cheek throbbed. But none of that compared to the ache inside her. Not just fear, loss. Like something essential had been carved out and thrown away. And still she remained quiet. Even now she didn't cry. Not because she was strong. Because crying meant hope. And she didn't have any left. Until she looked toward the hills. Somewhere out there, past the black line of the horizon, past the mountains that cut the world open like a scar, there was freedom. She didn't know what it looked like. She just knew this wasn't it. So she waited. And when his snores grew deeper, when the whiskey bottle rolled from his hand and shattered on the floor, Clara moved. Barefoot, she stepped through the dust, carrying nothing but a satchel with half a biscuit and her mother's silver hairpin. Her dress ripped at the knees. Her lip still bled, but her legs worked. Her heart beat. She was still alive. And that meant she could run. She didn't look back. The cold hit her like a slap. The high desert wind clawed at her hair and tore at her sleeves, but she kept moving, through sagebrush and sharp stones, up the ridge, toward the dark. Her breath was loud in her ears, each step a prayer, each rock beneath her heel a threat. And still she moved, until the shadow appeared. A rider, tall, still, seated on a horse like he'd grown from the land itself. A blanket covered his shoulders. His face, half in shadow, was unreadable. His eyes glinted with something that wasn't fear or greed or mockery. He said nothing. Clara stopped, panting. Her heart wanted to leap out of her chest. The rider looked her over, from torn dress to bleeding feet to the fire behind her eyes. Then he tossed a waterskin at her feet and said in a calm, clear voice, "You look like hell." She blinked. He waited. Then, slowly, he swung down from his horse and crouched to her level. She tensed, ready to run again. But he just offered her a blanket. She didn't take it. He didn't insist. A wind howled over the ridge. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "But if you stay out here, the coyotes will." She swallowed hard. Her lips parted. But still no sound. "Don't talk much, do you?" he asked, more amused than annoyed. She shook her head, barely. He nodded once. "Fair enough." Then he turned, walked back to his horse, and mounted. She thought he was leaving, that he'd vanish into the night, and she'd be alone again. But instead, he pointed east. "There's a creek 2 miles that way," he said. "You follow me, or you freeze. I don't care which." Then he rode off, slow enough for her to follow, fast enough that she'd have to try. Clara stood there for a long moment. Then she picked up the waterskin and followed him into the dark. And for the first time that day, she made a sound. She breathed. The fire cracked low, spitting tiny sparks into the cold desert night. Clara sat wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, knees drawn to her chest, her boots still missing, toes raw from the run. The stranger sat across from her, sharpening a blade with long, deliberate strokes. He hadn't spoken much since they reached this hidden rise of land nestled between thick sagebrush and a sloping wall of red rock. But he hadn't left either. She watched him from behind the blanket's edge. His face was stone still in the firelight, high cheekbones, sun-darkened skin, long hair braided down his back. His expression wasn't cruel or even curious. It was just still, like a man used to listening for trouble before it could speak. His horse huffed behind him, tethered loosely to a branch. The animal had more gear than she did: water, rope, blankets, dried meat, a bough. Clara didn't even have shoes. "Name's Tahu," he said at last, the blade pausing mid-stroke. She blinked, the sound catching her off guard. Then slowly, carefully, she nodded once. "I know you're wondering why I didn't ride off," he said. "Most men would." She didn't answer. "You look like someone trying real hard not to die. That kind of look don't lie." She lowered her eyes to the dirt. It was true. She hadn't thought past escape, hadn't planned, hadn't expected to survive past dawn. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated. Then she said quietly, "Clara." Tahu nodded. "Clara." There was silence again, but it was a warmer kind. The fire crackled between them. Somewhere in the dark, a night bird called out, low and lonely. He offered her a strip of dried meat. She took it with shaking hands. "You hungry or just polite?" She chewed slowly, the salt stinging a crack in her lip. "Hungry," she whispered. He half smiled. "Good. Means you ain't given up yet." She wanted to laugh at that. If he only knew how close she'd come to walking into the night and not stopping until the cold took her. But she just nodded again and looked into the fire. He resumed, sharpening the blade. Each stroke whispered through the sage-scented air. Silas Boone, Tahu muttered, eyes never lifting. That who you ran from? She froze. He looked up. Didn't think I recognized the bruises? Or the way you flinch when a man moves too fast? Clara didn't speak. She didn't have to. Boone's got a long list of enemies, he went on. You ain't the first girl he's taken like property. But you might be the first one I've seen fight to get away. I didn't fight, she murmured. You ran. That counts. Her eyes lifted to meet his. For a moment, the fire danced between them like a tether made of heat and unspoken things. Why help me? She asked finally. He stared into the flames. Because once I had a sister. They said she was too wild. Took her from my mother's arms when I was 10. Called it justice. I never saw her again. Clara felt a sting in her throat she hadn't expected. I figure I can't change that, he said. But I can stop another girl from ending up with broken bones and silence for a name. She didn't cry. Not yet. But something inside her loosened. Just a little. Tahu stood and tossed a handful of dry grass into the fire. The smoke curled up dark and soft. He scanned the darkness like a man expecting trouble to be on time. Rest while you can. We ride at first light. To where? A place Silas's men won't find us. And then, his voice was steady. Then we figure out what you want to do. Clara pulled the blanket tighter. I don't know what I want. You will. Sleep came slow. Clara lay beneath the stars, half listening to the wind stir the sagebrush. She thought of her mother's hands brushing her hair, of her father's silence when Silas said he'd take her like a prize. She thought of that single step into the cold when she could have stayed and broken forever. Tahu's fire never went out. By morning, they were riding. Tahu lent her a worn pair of moccasins from his saddlebag, too big, but better than nothing. He rode ahead, scanning the ridges. Clara followed on his second horse, a shaggy bay with a steady gait. They didn't speak much. The land did all the talking. Buzzards circling high above, dust devils spiraling in the distance, the low growl of thunder somewhere behind the horizon. By noon, they stopped at a narrow creek that wound through a split in the canyon. Tahu crouched and washed his hands. Clara knelt beside him, dipping water over her face, letting it cool her sunburned skin. I should go back, she said suddenly. Tahu didn't look up. To what? I don't know. But they'll say I ran, that I betrayed my marriage. He shook his head. You were traded, not married. Ain't the same. You don't understand. I understand better than you think. He stood and walked to the edge of the creek, gazing across the rocks like he saw ghosts there. They called my sister a thief. Said she stole food. Truth is, a settler refused to pay her for weaving cloth and called the law. She was 10. Clara sat still, heart pounding. I tried to stop them. One of them hit me so hard I couldn't speak for a week. My mother, she screamed until she lost her voice. Tahu turned. His face held no tears. Just memory. Weight. Purpose. They never looked back. Clara felt the heat rise in her chest again, not from the sun. I used to think silence kept me safe, she said. Tahu nodded. It doesn't. They didn't speak again until night. Their camp this time was deeper in the rocks. A small cave-like alcove protected from wind. Clara built the fire herself, using the flint and dried brush Tahu handed her. She sat straighter now. Watched the stars with more focus. You ever think of leaving all this behind? She asked. He shrugged. Sometimes. But this land is in my bones. Even after what they did. Especially after. Silence again. Then, the distant echo of hooves. Tahu rose, every muscle alert. Get down. Clara dropped behind the rocks. 3 riders. Shadows against moonlight. Moving slow, scanning the terrain. One of them laughed, drunken, sharp. She recognized the voice. Silas's man. The tall one with the scar on his throat. Tahu notched an arrow. Don't move. The riders drew closer, talking about rabbit tracks and easy money. One spit near the fire. Clara's heart raced. Tahu released. The first rider dropped, arrow in his shoulder. The others swore, spinning their horses. Tahu moved like smoke Another arrow flew. One man went down hard. The third fired blindly into the rocks, bullets ricocheting. Clara covered her ears, gasping. Then it was over. The horses fled. One man groaned in the dust, crawling. Tahu approached him. The man's eyes widened. "She's just property," he rasped. Tahu knelt beside him. "She's not yours," and knocked him out cold. They dragged the bodies behind the rocks, stripped weapons and food. Clara's hands trembled, but she didn't cry. She stood beside Tahu as he wiped his blade and looked at her. "You're not running anymore," he said. "Now they're chasing you." She stared at the fire, voice steady. "Then let them." He gave her a look, quiet pride, maybe warning. "They won't stop now." She nodded. "Good," she said. "Neither will I." The smoke from the fire curled up into the stars, carrying a promise with it. One made not with words, but with steel and silence, and something burning inside. Clara James had no idea who she was yet, but she knew who she wasn't anymore. The morning wind came sharp and dry across the high rocks, carrying the scent of blood, dust, and burning gunpowder. Clara sat with her knees pulled close beneath her borrowed blanket, eyes fixed on the body Tahu was dragging toward the brush. The man with the scar on his throat wouldn't be riding back to Silas Boone. Not now. Not ever. Tahu worked quickly, silent as ever. He searched the pockets of the fallen outlaw and pocketed a tin of cartridges and a small folded map. Clara watched, her heart a heavy thrum in her chest. Not from fear. Fear had burned out sometime between the arrow loosing and the gunshot, but from something colder, something deeper. A quiet understanding of what her escape had begun. She was no longer a runaway. She was a hunted woman. Tahu straightened and glanced her way. "You did good last night. Didn't scream. Didn't freeze." "I couldn't," she said, voice tight. "There was no time. That's when people show you who they really are." She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. Her arms were bruised from ducking behind rocks. Her fingers raw from gripping a stolen rifle too tight. But her spine had straightened. "What did the map show?" she asked. "Outpost. 2 ridges north. Boone's men stock supplies there." She frowned. "So they're preparing." Tahu nodded. "More will come." Clara picked up the rifle and checked the chamber, just like he'd shown her. "Then we make sure they don't come back." He looked at her long and quiet. "You're not the same girl from 2 nights ago." She looked out toward the horizon, where the mountains looked like sleeping giants. She didn't live through 2 gunfights. They broke camp before sun reached the canyon's lip. Tahu led the way, their horses trotting between rock and scrub. The sun carved golden streaks across the landscape, throwing long shadows that moved like ghosts beneath them. Clara rode with her chin high, blanket folded behind her saddle, rifle across her lap. The air buzzed with cicadas, and every distant hoofbeat made her fingers tighten. By midday, they reached a narrow plateau overlooking the outpost. From their perch behind boulders, Clara could see the shack, a lean timber frame with a rusted tin roof and smoke drifting from a stovepipe. 3 horses were tied out front. A 4th man leaned on the railing, chewing tobacco. Boone's flag was staked nearby, a red rag tied to a white cross. Tahu pointed to the far side. "Blind spot near the corral. We wait until dusk, then move in." Clara exhaled slowly. "You're sure you want me in this?" He didn't answer at first, just looked at her. "You'll be in it whether you shoot or not." They waited, cloaked in shadow. Clara counted each breath, each shift of light, each distant crow. Time moved slow and thick, like honey spilled on stone. Her thoughts circled the same fire. What happens after? Where do I go if Boone falls? Who am I when this ends? But every time fear crept near, it ran straight into anger. And anger had no patience left. When dusk fell, they moved. Tahu crept through the sagebrush like a shadow. Clara followed, heart hammering. They slipped past a trough, past stacked barrels of feed. The smell of horses mixed with smoke and whiskey. Laughter echoed from inside the shack, one man telling a story, others too drunk to care. Tahu made it to the side window. Clara crouched beside him. "They're relaxed," he whispered. "Good." She caught her reflection in the window glass. A dirty face, wide eyes, streaks of dried blood, and dust across her neck. She didn't flinch. Then the door creaked open. One of the men stepped out, belt loose, bottle in hand. He stumbled toward the outhouse. Tahu moved behind him in silence, one swift strike with the butt of his knife, and the man crumpled into grass. Clara held her breath. Her fingers tightened on the rifle stock. Tahu looked back. Now. They burst in. The noise inside shattered, chairs scraping, curses shouted. One man reached for his gun. Clara didn't think. She fired. The bullets struck the wall behind him, but the sound stunned them. Tahu moved in like lightning, knife, fist, boot. One man fell back through the table. Another hit the wall. The third fired blindly. Clara dropped behind a barrel. Her ears rang. Tahu grabbed the last man by the collar and slammed him against the post. "Where's Boone?" The man gasped, nose bleeding. "Gone south. Heading to New Mesa. Said he'd bring the girl back himself." Clara's heart turned to stone. Tahu's grip tightened. "How long ago?" "Yesterday. Said he'd ride light. One horse. Fast." Tahu knocked the man cold. Then silence. Clara stood slowly, the rifle still smoking in her hand. She stared at the bodies, at the splintered table, at the blood on the floor. "I missed," she said softly. "You fired," Tahu replied. "That's what mattered." They left the shack burning behind them. Flames licked up into the night, sending sparks to dance across the dark sky like fireflies. As they rode fast across the ridge, Clara didn't look back. They didn't stop until dawn stained the sky orange. Tahu halted near a bluff overlooking a wide stretch of red earth. In the distance, New Mesa, a rough mining town clinging to a dusty plain, where saloons outnumbered churches and gunfights served as entertainment. The kind of place Boone thrived. "He's there," Clara whispered. Tahu nodded. "He'll be watching for riders." "Then I go in alone." He turned sharply. "No. He expects men. Bounty hunters. Not a girl he thinks he owns." Tahu's jaw clenched. Too dangerous. So is waiting. A long silence passed. Then he reached into his coat and handed her a small, worn charm. Beads, feathers, and an etched symbol she couldn't read. "What's this?" He looked down the slope. "Something my sister made before she was taken. I carried it for years." "You carry it now." Clara held it close. "You think I'll live?" "I think you'll finish what he started." She nodded. "And if I don't come out?" Tahu's eyes turned cold. "Then no one does." They parted at the edge of the bluff. Clara rode alone into New Mesa as the town stirred from slumber. She tied her horse behind a stable and walked slow, deliberate, dust curling around her boots. Faces turned, curious, suspicious. A few eyes widened. She reached the saloon. Inside, it stank of sweat, smoke, and cheap gin. Men lined the bar, cards slapped on tables. And in the corner, sipping from a silver flask, sat Silas Boone. He didn't look up at first, but something in the room shifted when she entered. He turned slowly, and when he saw her, his grin spread like poison. "Well, hell," he drawled. "Look what the coyotes dragged back." Clara didn't flinch. He stood, taking a slow step toward her. "You forget whose name you wear." "I was never yours," she said. He chuckled. "You ran. That makes you mine twice over now." He drew. She was faster. The bullet caught him in the thigh. He howled and dropped, firing wild. The room exploded into screams. Clara ducked behind a pillar. Silas crawled, snarling like a dog, blood spilling into the sawdust. She stepped into the open. He aimed again. Another shot, this one from the doorway. Tahu. Silas's hand jerked as the bullet tore through his wrist. The pistol clattered. Clara walked over, eyes burning. She raised her rifle. "Go ahead," Silas hissed. "Do it. See if you got it in you." She leaned down. "You married me without a vow," she whispered. "I end it with one." She pulled the trigger. Not at his head. At his knee. He screamed. She turned away. Tahu met her at the door. "You left him breathing," he said quietly. She exhaled. That was the mercy. They rode until the town was behind them and the sun climbed high again. The wind was at their backs now. Clara felt it in her chest, a space opening wide, not just from relief, but from something new. She looked down at the charm in her hand. The beads were warm from her skin. "I think I know what I want now," she said. Tahu waited. She looked ahead at the endless road. "I want to live without fear." He nodded once. "Then let's start." And they rode into the wild, dust curling behind them, promise heavy in the morning air. The storm rolled in fast, as they always did in the high desert, wind first, dry and biting, then the black wall of clouds swallowing the horizon like a rising beast. Clara didn't flinch at the thunder, didn't glance back at the lightning stitching itself through the sky. She just tightened the reins, pressing her heels gently into the mare's ribs, eyes set on the trail ahead. Tahu rode beside her, the brim of his hat pulled low, jaw firm. His silence wasn't cold, it was steel being tempered. They'd ridden west, far from New Mesa, leaving behind the saloon with its broken floorboards, the blood and the sawdust, and the gasps of men who realized too late that the girl they'd once pitied now carried a storm in her voice. Silas Boone wasn't dead. That had been Clara's choice. But the legend he clung to, the myth of ownership, of dominance, of impunity, that had died screaming at her feet. The sky split again. A fork of lightning struck the hilltop to the north, sending birds skyward in a panic burst. "We need shelter," Tahu said, breaking the silence. Clara nodded. There was an old trail near the ridge, one he'd used before. A sandstone cavern carved out by wind and time, big enough for them and the horses. They reached it just as the rain came in sheets. Inside, Clara pulled off her soaked coat and crouched near the wall, setting down her satchel and rifle. Her eyes had changed, no longer wide and darting. Now they watched everything, absorbed, calculated. Tahu built the fire fast, hands practiced. Sparks caught, flared, bloomed. He didn't speak for a while, and she didn't mind. The storm roared outside. Inside, there was only the firelight and the quiet rhythm of breath. The moment felt heavier than the walls around them, not because of what had just happened, but because of what still lay ahead. "You never asked what I planned next," Clara said softly. Tahu looked up. "I thought it wasn't my place," he replied. "You've walked with me every step, fought beside me. You've earned your place." His gaze held hers. "Then I'll say this. The trail doesn't end just because you've outrun the man who chased you. I know." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a folded piece of cloth, Boone's red rag from the outpost, the symbol of his gang. "I don't want to just survive," she said. "I want to make sure no girl ends up where I did. No man trades his daughter like livestock. No outlaw carves his name across someone else's life." Tahu's eyes softened. "You're thinking war. I'm thinking justice." Outside, the rain slowed. The wind faded to a whisper, brushing past the mouth of the cave like a breath of warning. Tahu leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You'll need people," he said. "Riders, scouts, voices that carry. I'll find them. Outlaws won't just scatter. Then we scatter them." Her words weren't angry. They were clear, forged. Every syllable sounded like it had been tested in fire. He studied her for a long while. Then slowly he nodded. "I'll ride with you." She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. The fire between them had become something else now, not just warmth, but a bond tempered by survival and belief. The next morning, they rode out. The air was clean and sharp from the rain. The desert stretched wide in every direction, but Clara didn't feel lost. She was building something now. Every mile, every hoofbeat, every whisper of wind carried purpose. Word spread faster than expected. A saloon girl in Tumble Creek heard what Clara had done and slipped her a pistol wrapped in velvet. "My father tried to sell me once," she'd whispered. "Make sure the next man who tries don't have a tongue left to lie with." A former ranch hand with a burned brand across his chest offered 2 rifles and a horse. "I seen what Boone's men do when they ain't stopped. Been waiting for someone who don't flinch." And from the Comanche villages, quiet allies emerged, warriors who knew the land better than any map, who had no love for the outlaws choking it with fire and greed. Clara didn't lead like a man. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She moved like a storm behind the hills, seen only by the consequences left behind. They burned caches, scattered ambushes, freed girls bound in wagons, left notes carved into tree trunks. No man owns a woman. Try again and bleed. By the time Boone healed enough to walk, the West was whispering her name like a ghost tale told around firelight. He sent men. They vanished. Then he sent 2 of his best to kill her in her sleep. They were found tied to a tree, their boots nailed 10 feet up. Clara's knife stuck in the dirt between them, with one word etched into the blade: promise. Boone panicked, moved south, gathered what was left of his men, 40 strong, armed, desperate. Tahu found Clara staring at the map under a starlit sky, her finger tracing their last camp. "You planning to wait him out?" he asked. "No," she said. "I want him to come." She looked up, eyes shining like obsidian in firelight. "I want him to believe he's strong enough to kill me again, just long enough to find out I'm not the same girl he left bleeding in a shack." The ambush was set on the rim of Dust Hollow, a place where the hills funneled into one narrow path. Clara stood there at dawn, alone, boots planted firm, wind snapping her coat behind her. Boone rode in, flanked by hard-faced men. His lip curled when he saw her. "Still breathing," he growled. "Not just breathing," she replied. "Becoming." He raised his hand to signal the charge. And then the hills came alive. From every ridge, from every shadow, from the sage and stone, riders emerged. Arrows flew. Bullets screamed. Clara stood still in the center of the chaos, rifle lowered, eyes fixed on the man who once dragged her from a church and made her believe she was nothing. Boone drew. She moved first. One shot. His horse reared. He fell. Dust swallowed him as he hit the ground. Clara walked through the storm toward him, each step deliberate. The battle behind her raged. Around her, the dust spun like a dance. Boone crawled backward, bleeding, panting, spitting curses. She stood over him. "You took everything," he rasped. "No," she said. "You tried." He reached for a knife at his boot. She stepped on his hand. "I was afraid of you," she said. "Now I pity you." Then she turned. She didn't kill him. She left him there, broken and alone, just as he'd left so many others. By nightfall, the last of his gang had fled or fallen. Dust Hollow was silent again. Tahu found her near the ridge, staring at the valley. "You did it," he said. "No," she answered. "We did." He nodded. "What now?" She turned to him. The wind caught her hair, loose now, wild as the land she walked. "Now I built something better." Tahu reached into his coat, pulled out a strip of cloth, the old red rag. He handed it to her. She tied it to her saddle horn, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what was broken, of what would never be allowed again. They rode west, toward the horizon, toward legend, toward a world where girls weren't traded, voices weren't silenced, and warriors came back, not just for revenge, but to change the ending. And the land, quiet and vast, seemed to nod its approval. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Somewhere out there, another Clara might need to hear this.